All right, so we have gotten some pretty explosive reporting over the last couple of days in terms of the massive intelligence failure by the Israeli security forces and the Israeli government leading up to the October 7th Hamas attack inside of southern Israel. So, here from the New York Times, they say that Israel knew Hamas's attack plan more than a year ago. More than a year ago. So, it seems like basically what happened here, and we're going to read some of the details, is that they knew that some sort of massive, widespread Hamas attack from Gaza was going to come at any moment. But they decided to basically overlook it because they didn't think, like, number one, that Hamas really had the capabilities to do something like that. They sort of viewed it as more aspirational, as they're going to line out in this article. It just seems like they didn't really take this seriously, right? So this wasn't necessarily like a surprise attack that was totally unpredictable. It was more just like a widespread intelligence failure. And I don't even know if you could call it an intelligence failure because they had the intelligence on this, right? They're going to lay out how they had all of these documents, all of these plans, the training, the exercises that Hamas was conducting on the Israeli border leading up to this. They knew that this was coming. It's not necessarily an intelligence failure. It's more just a political failure on, I guess, the right-wing Netanyahu coalition that is in power right now, that I think decided it was more of a priority to have Israeli forces stationed in the West Bank to try to aid and abet with the illegal expansion of Israeli settlements into Palestinian land in the West Bank, and basically overlooking what this threat was from Hamas. So they continued, Israeli officials obtained Hamas's battle plan for the October 7th attack more than a year before it happened, according to documents, emails, and interviews. But Israeli military and intel officials dismissed the plan as aspirational, considering it too difficult for Hamas to carry out. The approximately 40-page document, which Israeli authorities codenamed Jericho Wall, outlined point by point exactly the kind of devastating invasion that led to the deaths of about 1,200 people. Some of those people were civilians, some of those people were military officials. We don't know exactly what the split is. The evidence is sort of still up in the air. There were certainly atrocities that were committed on that day, but some of those 1,200 deaths were Hamas attacking military targets. But they continue saying that the translated document, which was reviewed by the New York Times, did not set a date for the attack, but described a methodological, Jesus Christ, attack designed to overwhelm the fortifications around the Gaza Strip, take over Israeli cities, and storm key military bases, including a division headquarters, which is exactly what they ended up doing. They say that Hamas followed the blueprint with shocking precision. The document called for a barrage of rockets at the outset of the attack, drones to knock out the security cameras and automated machine guns along the border, and gunmen to pour into Israel en masse in paragliders, on motorcycles, and on foot, all of which happened on October 7th. The plan also included details about the location and size of Israeli military forces, communication hubs, and other sensitive information, raising questions about how Hamas gathered this kind of intelligence and whether there were potentially leaks from the Israeli security establishment. They also say that last year, shortly after the document was obtained, officials in the Israeli military's Gaza division, which was responsible for defending the border with Gaza, said that Hamas's intentions were unclear. Then in July, just 3 months before the attacks, a veteran analysis with the Unit 8200, Israel's signals intelligence agency, warned that Hamas had conducted an intense day-long training exercise that appeared similar to what was outlined in the blueprint. So not only did they have the documents of what exactly Hamas was planning, but they also saw Hamas basically conducting training exercises for exactly what they were later going to carry out. And they chose to do essentially nothing about it. They say a colonel in the Gaza division brushed off their concerns, according to encrypted emails. He's saying, quote, I utterly refute that the scenario is imaginary, the analyst wrote in the email exchanges. The Hamas training exercise, she said, fully matched the content of this Operation Jericho Wall, as Israel was calling it. It is a plan designed to start a war. It is not just a raid on a village, obviously indicating that they knew that something, massive was coming. Officials privately conceded that had the military taken these warnings seriously and redirected significant reinforcements to the south, where Hamas attacked, Israel could have blunted the attacks or possibly even prevented them from happening. Now, why were they not able to, allocate the adequate amount of resources and military power to the south to prevent this Hamas attack or to blunt it, as they just said there? Well, according here to Ryan Grimm, not only did they not reinforce the areas that were under threat, they actively moved forces out of the Negev desert and the Negev region, which is sort of in like the south of Israel, and to the west, and they moved them to the West Bank to support the rampaging settlers. So this was something we kind of knew from the, in the immediate weeks after the October 7th attack, is that part of the reason why Hamas was able to be so successful in their attack into southern Israel, I think honestly wildly more successful than even Hamas probably thought that they were going to be. The reason that they were able to do that is because Israel had stationed so much of their security apparatus inside of the West Bank to aid with the expansion of these illegal Israeli settlements, and basically, aiding these Israeli settler terrorists in the West Bank to continue to displace Palestinians there. So this it does tie into the right-wing coalition of Benjamin Netanyahu and their overall settler colonial project within this region, and how that potentially led to a massive security failure on the southern border with Gaza, right? So, there's so much shit that's going on here. Obviously, gives you an indication in terms of why Netanyahu's approval rating right now, even inside of Israel, is so low. And we're going to get to that here in a minute. But I also wanted to touch on this here. So this was pointed out by Mohammed Shahada, okay, in terms of this recent Haaretz report that was put out. Now, this hasn't been translated into English, so I'm relying on his translation here of what this Haaretz report was actually saying. But they say here, okay, important, Haaretz definitively debunks iconic horror stories from the October 7th. Okay, so we're going to read through this, and then I'm going to give you guys my thoughts on all of this, right? So, of course, we had the 40 beheaded babies claim that was passed around in Israeli media by Israeli politicians. It was something that was even echoed by Joe Biden himself, that he then later walked back here from Al Jazeera. White House walks back Biden's claim that he saw personally children that were beheaded by Hamas. So this was a lie that basically took place in like multiple different forms. First, it was that there were 40 beheaded babies, and then it was that there were 40 babies that were killed, and some of them were beheaded, and then it was like, okay, maybe some babies were killed. Now, it looks like, according to this Haaretz report, that there was maybe like one or two or just a few babies who were killed during the October 7th attack. No, I'm not saying that to try to downplay atrocities, right? I'm just trying to be as accurate as possible according to the evidence that we have at our disposal, right? So, of course, multiple things can be true at the same time, right? Hamas committed atrocities on October 7th. That's indisputable. They committed war crimes. They killed innocent civilians, right? That's indisputable. So then why are we going above and beyond, okay, to make up claims about 40 beheaded babies when that's verifiably incorrect? Okay, you're not doing, even if you are like the most pro-Israel person in the world, you are not doing a service to your own cause when you are making up claims like that, right? So 40 beheaded babies, it turns out, according to this Haaretz report and according to this translation here from Mohammed, that Haaretz is saying that only one baby was killed on October 7th. Now, obviously, one baby being killed in an attack like that is one too many babies being killed, obviously. But it's important to point out these kinds of things because situations like the 40 beheaded babies killed, or these other stories that he references here, right? Babies were burned in an oven, a pregnant woman's stomach was opened and her fetus was removed, children were bound together and burned, and a pregnant hostage was giving birth. All of these different things that are unverifiable claims, those are then used to justify what Israel is currently doing in Gaza. Because if you have an enemy that is beheading 40 children, 40 babies, okay, then it gives you a justification to say this enemy is so evil that any action that we take against them, even if it includes massacring civilians as collateral damage, as Israel would love to call them, then that is justified because look at how evil our enemy is. They, beheaded 40 babies, right? So it is important to get these things accurate. It is important to understand exactly what happened so that you don't feed in to Israeli propaganda that then allows them to do whatever they want and massacre innocent men, women, and children in Gaza. Now, keep in mind, even if all of this was true, right? Even if 40 beheaded babies, that claim was true, there was a baby that was burned in an oven, even if every single thing that Israel claimed was actually verifiably true, that still would not justify the slaughter of thousands and thousands of innocent children in Gaza. Okay, the latest estimates that I've seen is over 7,000, 8,000 children that have been killed in Gaza so far. Okay, so 40 beheaded babies, as much of an incomprehensible atrocity as that would be had it been true, that would not give you a free green light to go commit a bunch of war crimes in Gaza. That's not how this shit works. That's not how international law works. That's not even how morality works. If you are subjected to a terrorist attack, that doesn't give you a green light to go and commit a bunch of terrorism yourself in a revenge tour, right? In the same way that 9/11 was a terrorist attack that killed thousands of American civilians, and yet that didn't give the United States a justification to go in and to slaughter hundreds of thousands of innocent people in the Middle East in response to that, right? So, I mean, this was an interesting report here. And again, I'll link this down below if you want to go and read through it yourself. And we're going to get a full, accurate translation here, 100% from Haaretz, hopefully in the next couple of days. But, I mean, again, it just ties into this. It's a very frustrating thing to cover because it's like you don't need to lie about the atrocities, right? I mean, I look at what's happening in Gaza right now on the ground, and it is enough to me for me to get the point across that I'm trying to make, for me to show you as accurately as I possibly can what is happening in Gaza. I don't need to make up fake stories, okay? I don't need to exaggerate what's happening. I'm trying to be as accurate as possible, and it just so happens that me delivering that accurate reporting in terms of what is happening on the ground in Gaza is enough for most people with morality, most people with a conscience, to say, this is evil, this is terrible, these are atrocities, these are war crimes, right? So that's the difference there, right? But it seems like there are many things that were echoed at the highest echelons within U.S. politics and Israeli politics that just were not confirmed at any level. And so we move on to this, right? As the war rages, Israelis' trust in Netanyahu plummets, a poll finds. They say here from Haaretz, a poll conducted by researchers at Bar Ilan University asked Israelis about trust in information and decision-making regarding the war in Gaza. Results showed that under 4% trust Netanyahu with their current actions in Gaza. They say that the IDF spokesman is listed as the most reliable figure. I mean, obviously I would disagree with that, but I mean, think about this. Netanyahu, right? He 100% has a higher approval rating within the United States of America than he does even within Israel. And I think that should tell you something, right? When he has under a 4% trust rating on his actions in Gaza or his response to October 7th or his handling of October 7th, I think that should tell you something, right? Israel is not a monolith. The Jewish people certainly are not a monolith, right? This is why you see so many groups out there like Jewish Voices for Peace and If Not Now leading some of the ceasefire protests that we have seen over the last couple of weeks, okay? But even within inside Israel, it is not a monolith. And in fact, an overwhelming majority, in this case over 96%, do not trust Netanyahu and his current actions, right? And so we got some other polling data here that I think was pretty interesting from the United States in terms of how Americans view the Israeli response to October 7th. So they say here, this is a Gallup poll that was conducted between November 1st and November 21st. So this is a couple weeks ago here, but still pretty valid. They say Americans' views of Israel's military action in Gaza by subgroup. So, I mean, let's break this down here, right? So overall, approval rating of Israel's actions in Gaza. So the official question is, do you approve or disapprove of the military action Israel has taken in Gaza, right? So this hopefully would be encompassing the American people's entirety of their perspective on how Israel has been handling their response since October 7th, right? 50% approve overall, 45% disapprove. Now, people who watch my channel, obviously, probably have a vastly different perspective in terms of how Israel has been handling this, right? I would think if I polled my own audience, it would probably be 99% disapprove, right? But I mean, think about this from the American people's perspective, right? We live in a country that is the most fervent backer of everything that Israel has done over the last number of decades than any country on the face of the planet, okay? The American people have been propagandized more than any other country on the face of the planet outside of Israel itself in terms of the issue of Israelis and Palestinians, right? So the idea that even after a massive terrorist attack, okay, even after Hamas went in and did commit atrocities inside of Israel on October 7th, even after all of the backlash to that, the media hype surrounding that, the political response to all of that, that in the United States of America, you would have 45% of the American people looking at this situation and disapproving of Israel's actions in response to October 7th. That is astounding. Like, that is completely blowing my mind that this is a reality, right? I mean, obviously, I would agree with it. I agree with the 45% here, but it's just blowing my mind that it's almost a 50-50 split here. This is unimaginable in the scope of recent American history that this kind of a thing, especially after an event like October 7th, that this would be the reality, okay? And it gives you a perspective, I think, in terms of how overblown Israel has gone in their response to this, right? You have to be so barbaric in your response to something like October 7th for the American people, who are, again, more propagandized, more pushed in one direction on this issue than anybody else, to be siding against you. 45% disapprove of Israel's response inside of Gaza. Okay? You break it down by gender, men, extremely disappointing here. 59% approve, 37% disapprove. Women doing significantly better on this issue. 52%, a majority of women in this country, disapprove of Israel's actions in Gaza. You break it down by age here. I mean, this is probably the most interesting aspect of all of this, right? 18 to 34, that's where I would fall. 67% disapprove. And then the Biden administration wonders why young Americans are turning away from him right now for 2024. You break it down by race and ethnicity. This is also interesting. White adults, again, incredibly disappointing here. 61% approve, 36% disapprove. And then people of color, 30% approve, 64% disapprove. Look at the disparity here. You can break it down by education. That's basically the same there, 50-50 split. And you break it down by party ID. Now, this is also important for 2024. Republicans obviously overwhelmingly support Israel's actions. Independents are a majority, actually. Well, not a majority, but a plurality against Israel's actions, 48 to 47. So, I mean, it's within the margin of error most likely, but still, that's pretty astounding there, that independents, more independents disapprove of Israel's actions than approve of Israel's actions. And Democrats, it is overwhelmingly 63 to 36 disapproving of Israel's actions there. So, I mean, again, listen, there's your updates for right now. I mean, this is this is a pretty astounding report here from the New York Times in terms of how Israel knew about the October 7th attack. They didn't know the date necessarily, but they knew something like this was coming. And I think in large part because the Benjamin Netanyahu far-right coalition decided it was more important to focus on expanding their illegal settlements and backing, Israeli settler terrorism in the West Bank, that was more important than securing their southern border. And so potentially they overlooked this, and it ended up happening. And I think, honestly, again, it happened in a much more drastic way than probably even Hamas was anticipating that it was going to take place. And then you see all of this polling data, I think, is extremely interesting, both in the United States and within Israel. And yeah, I mean, I'll leave you guys off with that. I think this is all incredibly interesting stuff. I mean, let me know what you guys think about all of this. But yeah, I'll be back tomorrow with some more updates, because we definitely have some absolute tragedies and horrific images that are still coming out of Gaza as Israel is ramping up their offensive in the southern portion of the Strip right now.
Everyone is saying good politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying